classification, and I hope it will become clear why I chose that. But since this is a little bit a celebration of John and Egenis, let's start with John. One of the things that I've heard again and again in his talks is the sentence, "I'm not a historian." He's written this wonderful little book, which has a lot of historical things to say about Darwin, but builds, of course, on historical literature. So he's not averse to history. He is not a historian. And this points, I think, to a division of labor that, of course, goes back quite a while in the history, especially of Anglophone philosophy or analytic philosophy. And one of the people it goes back to, I guess, is Popper, who very strongly defended at the beginning of his book, The Logic of That Scientific Discovery, that anything that has to do with coming up with hypotheses, theories, is for, as he puts it, empirical psychology. I guess that is just a pointer to a whole set of disciplines, history included. It's not, I think, a simple division that this has, of course, to do with the division of the context of discovery in the context of justification. Philosophy is about justification for Popper, and all the rest is left to the historical, psychological, sociological disciplines. Now, I don't. For me, when I encountered this very early on in my work on my dissertation on Linnaeus, highly unsuitable subject for Popper's logic of scientific discovery. When I encountered it, I read it more as a challenge, I was doing my PhD in philosophy, so I, of course, did not accept that division of labor, but I thought, well, there must be some form of logic to induction, yeah? And I can maybe find it in Linnaeus. So that's the impetus I took from this. Now, the context of discovery, context of justification, a distinction has been much maligned. I think it holds as an analytic distinction. Sometimes people discover things, sometimes they try to justify what they discovered. And it does, to some extent, I think, also capture the division of labor between historians and philosophers of science. Which is not a simple one, however. It's not that historians look at the past and philosophers look at the present and perhaps sometimes the future when they get normative. It's not even that historians only deal in contingency and accidents and philosophers search for the eternal, the necessary. But there is a difference in perspective that I very badly try to capture in this diagram. To me, that is the perspective on the temporality, the temporal structure of science, that it progresses in some sense. And historians tend to look at it in what I call from a prospective perspective, whereas philosophers like to look at it in a retrospective perspective. Prospective, the interest in events in historians, investigating the conditions of possibility for what comes next in a way. Retrospective is obviously interested in principles, more or less, and investigating the necessary conditions for what comes first. And that's, of course, what the principle is. It always comes first. Of course, T0 is the timeless, the eternal. I think we've left that. Most philosophers have left that behind. Not all, I guess, but the timeless can also play a role, obviously, in historians when they make assumptions about human nature. Now, interestingly and paradoxically, Popper's distinction has left one of the most venerable scientific methods to historians, induction. That's a little bit weird. But he sort of refuses to even deal with it. Yeah, and that's for me an illustration how historians and philosophers often talk at cross purposes. Historians pick up where philosophers leave things, and vice versa. Yeah, so this talking at cross purposes is what I want to explore a little bit. One other example that influenced me a lot was Nelson Goodman's fact, fiction, and forecast, his concept of entrenchment, where he also leaves the historian to pick up. He doesn't, I OCR to his book today and searched for history, it's not there. That word appears then in the foreword written by Hilary Putnam. There you get it quite a lot. But basically, I won't bore you with the new riddle of induction and brew and all these funny predicates he comes up with. But entrenchment, of course, is in the end a historical process of classifying, of making classes. And actually, and this I found very inspiring, not just making the concepts, the named classes in that sense, but actually making the extensions, yeah, which is a weird demand. Now, this is something that I also find in John Dupré's In Defense of Classification, a paper I really love. I don't know whether John still loves it that much, but what really was an eye-opener for me was his definition of classification, namely as a practical activity of assigning the vast numbers of organisms in the world to particular kinds. In what sense can that be a practical activity? And now, if we think about the word classification, it is quite obviously an artificial word. It is actually has rings of neologism, and it was indeed a neologism, an 18th century neologism. It is something that apparently a new word was needed for in the 18th century. And one can get a sense of that if one looks at publications of the 18th century, because what we see there is an obsession with tabulating things. And Foucault was quite right here. Tables are the thing in the 18th century. You get lots and lots of tables. You get a publication like this one, where you not only have 3 different tables for classifying minerals, but also at least 7 different systems to classify plants. And at the end of the book, tables that show you which insects grow on which plants. Everything is tabulated and classified in various ways. The units of classification here are species and general. And John Dupré's argument in the paper I cited was one should treat species as units of classification, which has historical consequences. Darwin, Origin of Species, what was he talking about? That's been a matter of endless debate. There is a history prior to Darwin where where species were made into units simply by classifying, by tabulating things like this. Here we also see how you can actually make extensions, because the extensions of these classes in these tables are the genera and species names that are listed under the headings. I've looked into this in quite detail. This is Linnaeus working on the natural system. Again, you see him playing around with creating ever new extensions of the natural families, as we can call them today, of plants. And I hope to have illustrated how philosophical literature can give an impulse to historians to pursue questions by their own means. Now, a lot of time has gone by since I started my PhD, obviously, and started working on Linnaeus. And I think at the current moment, this division of labor has given way to a much more collaborative and integrated way of addressing problems in the history and philosophy of science. A lot of people in this room are defenders of integrated history and philosophy of science. I'm always a bit skeptical about the integration part of it. But still, especially with the data turn, I think something has happened that data are these Janus-faced entities that are somehow given from history, but somehow are also foundational for what science does. I'll just give two examples here of books that at least in part deal with data. So that's, I think, where the future goes. Talking at cross purposes, I think, to some extent can also be seen as a good thing, because if one places the focus on the cross, where things cross, and it doesn't have to be totally integrated. That's perhaps the point I want to make here. But those crossing points have multiplied, I guess, in